So there's a reason I'm in my dressing gown still, and it's not a Jordan Owen tribute act. There's a reason I look rough as toast, and I'm making a video early on a Saturday morning, and that's because the last topic to cover in this Mental Health Awareness Month, in the topics they want to bring up, is work-life balance. So this kind of shows to you that I'm getting up early on a Saturday morning to make videos, which is kind of work, kind of not, in a way. So I'll do the usual thing. I'll go through the subtopics that they want people to bring up, and then I'll talk about my own personal experiences around this, and let's see what we think. So the stats that they provide as the campaign materials are for America, but I think the UK is second only to America in the Western world in terms of having a skew towards work and away from life in terms of work. But the US stats are the US stats, but the UK stats aren't much better. So in the US, nearly 40% of people report working at least 50 hours per week, and nearly 20% work 60 hours or more. And the thing about overtime is it always used to mean more money, and in many jobs it still does. I don't know about in the US, but here in the UK you're often expected to work a certain amount of overtime without recompense for it. The job market is so volatile, and a lot of people are so easily replaceable that to hold on to your job, let alone to get more money, you have to work extra hours, and it's expected of you, even though you're only contracted for a much smaller amount of hours, 35, 40 hours a week. And this doesn't necessarily appear on the books. I mean, there's European legislation about the maximum number of hours people should be expected to work, and so on. So a lot of people have that skewed, and it's a lot of pressure to be expected to do that just to keep your job, and that's it. That much over-concentration on work causes a huge amount of stress. It can worsen conditions, generally speaking not very good for you, whereas people who have a work-life balance are more satisfied with their jobs and their life, are less likely to be depressed, or less likely to get severe depression and anxiety, and so on. So generally it's good for you to have some kind of balance between these two aspects of your life, and this is true even for people who get a great deal of satisfaction out of their work, or who get a sense of their identity from their work, which a lot of people do, and that's potentially going to be a problem in the future, but we'll get to that. Lots of people cope with this overwork, with this stress from having to bottle everything up at work, because you daren't step out of line in case you lose your job, and everyone's in a lot more of a fragile circumstance than they used to be. So a lot of people do things like drugs, drinking, lashing out at people and so on, to externalize, dull, or cope with the stresses that they feel from work. If you're ill, particularly if you have mental health issues, people are terrified of taking any days off for fear of losing their job. Again, there is a lot of pressure, a lot of fear. The stronger side, the whip hand, is very much on the side of the employer these days, especially since the unions were essentially broken up and defanged and don't particularly exist in an effective way anymore. So the negotiating position of the worker is a hell of a lot weaker, and while you can take people to court for constructive dismissal, all those kinds of things, it's not easy, and it costs money that you don't have if you're unemployed, especially when here in the UK the availability of public funds for legal cases has very much dried up. There was concerns about people making frivolous cases, but it's also affected genuine cases. Sleep can be massively affected by workplace stress, and a lack of sleep is a massive stressor, a massive factor in other issues, particularly mental health issues, again, many of which are rooted in, or at least related to, disruptions to the sleep cycle. Depression, for example, you often end up with a very out of whack circadian rhythm that just doesn't match up to the day outside. One way of describing it could be like a permanent jet lag, I suppose. Some jobs are more stressful than others. People who work in retail, tech support, food and drink jobs suffer a great deal more massive stress, and it affects their personal relationships, probably because they're having to interact with people all day, every day, and then just kind of need a break from it later. So people suffer a huge amount of stress because of work, and this emphasis on work over life, it is a huge and constant pressure on people. You know, you've always got bills to pay, and there's much less slack. There's much less room to maneuver in terms of how much people get paid and how much things cost. Costs have gone up. Wages have relatively stayed stagnant across Western nations, while at the same time productivity has gone up. So all of this extra productivity, all of this extra wealth that's being created is not coming back to the workers or being reinvested in society. It's being captured by a very small top tier of people who aren't recycling it into the world, aren't spending it on their workers, improving their lot, and so on. You know, all of these things are huge issues, and it can aggravate physical conditions as well, like cancer, like arthritis, and so on. A lot of people who are forced to care for others who have more severe mental health or physical issues don't get paid, can't get paid, have trouble getting their allowances and so on if there's government assistance to be had. The whole thing is an enormous nightmare. Now, while this is an important issue, it's something that is out of our hands as individuals. You know, if you want to make more time for sport or socialization or hobbies or mindfulness meditation or attending a church or a group or a hobby or whatever, you know, that's something you can do. But work is not really something that most of us are in a position to reduce if we want to keep our life going, you know. So it seems odd to include this in an awareness package on Mental Health Month, because it's not really something we have any control over, just like we don't really have any control over our condition, only the coping strategies and things that we can do around it. If you want to work on work-life balance, then it's the culture of work that needs to change. It's the employers that need to shift to make accommodation or to provide better recompense for their workers, but that obviously affects the bottom line, and we live in a society that maximizes profit and takes that as the one and only indication that something is working. I think there are other ways you can measure success in terms of employee happiness and so on. The bottom line, the reward to the shareholders, is not and should not be the only measure of success. And this is why, while private companies are fantastic at doing a lot of things, they're terrible at running healthcare solutions and so on, because the measure of success in a hospital isn't how much profit you make, it's how many people you make well. And so the profit motive just doesn't mesh or marry up with health concerns. So what about me? I have worked normal jobs. Oddly enough, when they've been things that don't require a lot of brain, they've actually been relatively relaxing and so on. I mean, you have to keep your numbers up. I did data entry for a while. That was boring, but I was with a good team who made things fun, and it just didn't take a lot of brain power or effort. Tech support was incredibly stressful, and I took quite a lot of days off feeling genuinely ill, but that began to be questioned. Then when I moved into web design, I was pretty much left to my own devices, and the lack of work there was a different kind of stress, even though it gave me space to do my own thing. Then being self-employed, you never get a day off when you're self-employed. These videos don't really make money, but I suspect that they're a lot of the reason why people back me on Patreon and so on is for the videos more than anything else. but it's kind of work and it's kind of leisure, and I do feel a pressure and a sense of duty to keep bringing them out on the regular. But they also make me feel better to do, so that's kind of halfway between. Now, even though I am ill and have been for many years with severe depression and anxiety issues, but the pressure to work never really goes away, and I'm never really off the clock. You know, inspiration hits, and you have to go and use it, and that is a huge stress. Even though I'm my own boss, and you think, you know, you can make your own hours and so on, any time you're not working, you tend to feel that you're wasting time, wasting money, wasting potential, failing to support yourself. Now, after 10 years of struggling with this, I finally applied for and got government assistance. And in some ways, that's better, that's less stress. In other ways, I feel this great sense of pressure and duty to work as hard as I can to try and use that money to get off the treadmill a bit, to get into a more comfortable position where I can support myself more easily, and so on. And also, even though I struggled along for 10 years without getting this assistance and only buckled and caved when I really had to, you still get a lot of critics, a lot of trolls, a lot of conservatives who assume that because you're on assistance and because you're articulate and seem capable, that you're somehow just malingering and sponging off the state and their hard-won money being taken away, and taxation is theft and blah blah blah, and I should just be left to die and starve in the street or something. So there's a lot of pressure there as well, social expectation and condemnation. The world of work is changing, is going to change. Automation, I don't think it's going to come in as quickly as some people fear, but it is going to change the landscape very much. There already isn't really enough work, and there are a lot of bullshit jobs out there. The only things that are relatively safe at the moment are creative enterprises. But if you get your identity, if you get your sense of self and worth from work and nothing else, you're going to be in severe problems in the future, especially younger people. You're going to be far better off finding something else to build your identity around. Something meaningful, so not race, not sexuality, not gender, not any of those things, but something that you do, and work used to be that and could create solidarity across those other lines. With work going away, it's going to have to be something else, and I don't know what can really step into that gap in the same way. Hobbies won't quite do it, I don't think. Politics will only deepen divides. Activism could potentially divide people more than it brings them together. Identity is a tricky issue, and for so long people have defined themselves by their work, so much so that many surnames are related to work. Thatcher, Cooper, Carter. It's going to be a bigger problem in the future, and a bigger problem for people's mental health, I'm sure. As for me, I'm trying to find a good balance where I don't feel guilty for not working, but where I take care of myself a bit more, and we'll see where that goes. Sang.
The police bring in reinforcements.
There was justice there, no poverty and no violent crime.